Lieutenant Commander Vex'tor Quazeel, or just Vex, as his colleagues called him when the Admiral wasn't breathing down their gill slits, squinted his 4 crystalline eyes at the surveillance feed. Again. Those confounding humans were doing it again. Computer, magnify Sector 7B of the Galactic Relations Conference Room, Vex commanded, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm that his species, the Zar'konian, recognized as profound irritation. The computer obliged with a soft chime. "Oh, wait, you look at that," Vex muttered to himself, tapping his chitinous fingers on the console. 3 more humans just entered, and where did they go? The back, always. The back. He threw his upper appendages up in exasperation, nearly knocking over his nutrient supplement. Seriously, is there some kind of gravitational anomaly that pulls their primitive primate bodies to the rear of every gathering space? Vex had been assigned to the seemingly insignificant task of cataloging sentient species' social behaviors by Admiral Kra, a punishment, really, for that unfortunate incident involving the ambassador's prized pet and Vex's experimental sonic disruptor. But what had started as mind-numbing research had evolved into a genuine obsession with human positioning tactics. Specialist Prill. "Come view this footage," Vex called out. Prill Zazoon, a Melnarian with skin the color of sunset and twice as many limbs as was practical, glided over. Her gelatinous form hovered above the ground in what Vex considered an unnecessary display of evolutionary advantage. "What is it now, Vex? More human conspiracy theories?" she asked, her voice modulating between 3 different harmonic ranges, a trait Vex found incredibly distracting during their shared meal periods. "Not a conspiracy if it's documented behavioral fact," Prill Vex retorted, gesturing with 2 arms while the third brought up multiple camera angles. "Look, 17 separate meetings, conferences, diplomatic exchanges, and even their recreational gatherings. The pattern is undeniable." Prill's outer membrane rippled in what Vex had learned to interpret as her version of an eye roll. "Maybe they just prefer the acoustics back there? Or perhaps your intense scrutiny of their backsides has something to do with that Terran entertainment subscription I found in your personal data cache." "That was research material," Vex sputtered, his exoskeleton flushing a bright orange. "And this isn't about their anatomical configurations, though those are bizarrely inefficient. This is about strategic positioning." The conference room feed showed the humans casually greeting other species as they settled into their chosen rear positions. They appeared relaxed. Even jovial one male with facial hair was actually propping his lower limbs on another chair, a violation of at least 3 interspecies etiquette protocols. "Computer, pull up historical data on Earth military tactics," Vex commanded. Working, the computer responded in the soothing tones that Vex had specifically programmed to sound like his clutch mother. Data compiled. Human military tactical patterns throughout their historical record show a significant preference for high ground advantage and wall at your back positioning. "Hey," see, Vex exclaimed, slapping his console triumphantly. "See what exactly?" Prill asked, extending a tendril to manipulate the display. "That humans, like most evolved predator species, prefer not to be ambushed from behind? Groundbreaking research, Vex. I'm sure the Admiral will immediately promote you to the Galactic Threat Assessment Division." "Laugh all you want," Vex muttered, saving the new observations to his increasingly large file labeled human tactical anomalies. "But when these supposedly peace-loving creatures suddenly reveal whatever they're planning, I'll be the only one prepared." Prill's body shimmered with amusement lights. "Yes, I'm sure their secret plan to dominate the galaxy begins with sitting at the back of conference rooms. Brilliant strategy." Vex ignored her sarcasm. He knew something significant was hiding in plain sight. These humans, with their fragile bodies, limited sensory range, and bafflingly emotional decision-making processes, had somehow survived their own violent history and emerged onto the galactic stage with remarkable confidence. There had to be more to their innocuous-seeming habits than met all 4 of his eyes. "Computer, set notification alert for any deviation in human positioning patterns during the remainder of the Galactic Relations Conference." "Alert set, Lieutenant Commander." Vex settled back in his observation chair, multifaceted eyes fixed on the humans. He would crack their code. It was only a matter of time. Humans had only joined the Galactic Confederation 87 cycles ago, practically newborns on the cosmic timeline. Most species had thousands of cycles under their evolutionary belts before achieving interstellar travel. The humans? They went from primitive combustion engines to faster-than-light travel in less than 300 years of their own timekeeping. It was, quite frankly, terrifying. Briefing commencing announced the conference room AI as Vex settled into his seat beside Admiral Vex'tor, whose massive exoskeletal frame made Vex look like a juvenile by comparison. "Lieutenant Commander, I expect this presentation to justify the resources you've consumed," rumbled the Admiral, her pheromones signaling both skepticism and mild curiosity in encouraging combination. "It will," Admiral Vex assured, trying to contain his excitement. "Computer, display exhibit a human historical military engagements." The holographic display illuminated, showing countless battles from Earth's blood-soaked history. "So they fight. All species fight," huffed Dr. Bezmal, the Confederation's leading xenobiologist and Vex's most vocal critic. "Yes, Doctor, but look at how they fight," Vex countered, highlighting several battles: Thermopylae, Agincourt, Normandy, numerous engagements where the smaller human force defeated a numerically superior opponent through positioning and tactics. "Your point," Admiral Vex'tor clicked impatiently. "My point, Admiral, is that humans are considered the teddy bears of the Confederation. Soft, weak, non-threatening." Vex pulled up the Confederation species threat assessment rankings. Humans rank 127th out of 143 sentient species for physical capabilities. Their skin tears if they brush against a Thraxian velvet plant, for stars' sake. Commander Tozak, a burly Deltavian with natural armor plating, chuckled. "I arm wrestled a human champion once. Nearly broke his entire skeletal structure without trying. Fragile little things." "Exactly," Vex exclaimed. "And yet, their diplomatic influence has grown 340% since joining the Confederation. They've negotiated 17 major interspecies treaties. They have trade agreements with species that historically wouldn't even acknowledge each other's existence." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "You're suggesting what exactly?" asked Dr. Bezmal, her antennae twitching nervously. "I'm suggesting that we've misinterpreted human weakness as harmlessness," Vex explained, bringing up his observation logs. "Humans compensate for physical limitations with preparation and positioning. They're constantly watching, assessing. Their seemingly casual demeanor masks a species that evolved as both predator and prey." Vex advanced the display to footage of human ambassador Blake Reynolds at the recent trade dispute resolution. While the Zar'konian and Phlebian representatives screamed threats at each other, the human sat back, eyes moving systematically between speakers, exits, and security personnel. Notice how the human appears relaxed but has calculated precise movement paths to the exit. How he's positioned to observe every other species in the room. How his back is always protected. Admiral Vex'tor leaned forward, her massive frame creaking. "Interesting, but hardly evidence of some grand human scheme." "There's more," Vex continued, bringing up sociological data. "Humans have integrated into every level of Confederation society, from maintenance to high-level bureaucracy. They've placed themselves in positions where they're generally overlooked but have access to critical information." "Like you, Lieutenant Commander," Dr. Bezmal asked sarcastically. Vex chose to ignore the jab. "Humans have a saying from their military history: amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. While we've been focused on their military capabilities, or lack thereof, they've been embedding themselves in our supply chains, communication networks, and diplomatic corps." Images flashed across the screen: humans working in starship maintenance bays, humans in communication hubs, humans serving refreshments at high-level diplomatic functions. "And the most telling detail," Vex said, lowering his voice dramatically, "is that they know we underestimate them, and they encourage it. They play into the adorable human stereotype. They act less coordinated than they are. They pretend not to understand complex concepts, so we explain more than we should." The room had grown uncomfortably quiet. "They're gathering intelligence," Vex concluded. "Every single day, in plain sight. And it all starts with where they choose to sit at the back of the room, watching us all. The Grand Diplomatic Summit of the 93rd Confederation cycle was, by all official accounts, meant to be tediously boring. Representatives from all 143 recognized sentient species gathered in the massive amphitheater aboard the neutral space station. Harmonious exchange security protocols were at maximum efficiency, which is exactly why Vex had pulled every string in his professional network to be assigned there. "Stop fidgeting," hissed Prill, who had somehow maneuvered herself onto the security detail despite having absolutely no qualifications beyond being friends with the obsessed Zar'konian. "I'm not fidgeting. I'm observing," Vex muttered, his optical implant zooming in on the human delegation. And would you look at that? Even at the most prestigious gathering in the galaxy, where front row seats are considered the highest honor, the humans have requested seats at the back. "Yes, Vex, we all know your theory," Prill interrupted, her form rippling with annoyance. The human delegation, led by the affable Ambassador Reynolds, had indeed requested a modification to the traditional seating arrangement. They were positioned at the rear of their section, near one of the secondary exits. Most species interpreted this as human humility, not wanting to appear presumptuous as relative newcomers to galactic society. Vex knew better. Main proceedings commencing in 3 standard time units announced the station's AI. The massive chamber hummed with conversation in hundreds of languages, translation devices working overtime. The central platform rose, carrying Supreme Chancellor Krovax, an ancient Axilian whose 16 eyes could supposedly see into multiple dimensions, a claim Vex found scientifically dubious but politically expedient for the Chancellor. Distinguished representatives began the Chancellor, their voice resonating through the chamber. "We gather today to..." The lights flickered. Once, twice. Vex's attention snapped to the human delegation. While other species looked around in confusion or continued focusing on the Chancellor, every single human had subtly shifted posture. They weren't panicking, but something had changed. Their casual demeanor had vanished, replaced with what Vex could only describe as alertness. Merely a power fluctuation, assured the Chancellor. As I was saying, that's when the explosion hit. The blast came from beneath the central platform, sending the Chancellor and their security detail flying. Chaos erupted instantly. Screams and shouts in multiple languages created a cacophony of panic. Emergency containment fields activated, sealing the primary exits. Containment breach. "Possible attack in progress," shouted the security chief through Vex's communication implant. Vex watched in fascination as the various species reacted. The Thraxians formed defensive circles. The Melnarians, including Prill, flattened themselves against the ceiling. The Juraxians charged toward the front, seeking confrontation with whatever threat might appear. "And the humans?" Prill. "Look at the humans," Vex shouted above the chaos. The human delegation had moved with stunning coordination. Ambassador Reynolds was speaking rapidly into his communication device. 2 humans had positioned themselves at their exit door, and this made Vex's exoskeleton tingle with vindication they had somehow overridden despite the emergency lockdown. The rest were calmly but firmly directing nearby delegates toward their exit. "Lieutenant Commander, report status," demanded Admiral Gaz Kra through the comms. Explosion at the central platform. Cause unknown. Casualties. Vex paused, counting rapidly. "At least 12 visible from my position. Emergency systems activated, but wait." A second explosion rocked the chamber, this one from the primary entrance. Smoke filled the air as armored figures poured in, pirates from the Cygnus void. If their insignia was any indication, how they had breached the station's legendary security was a question for later. "We are under attack. Hostiles have breached," the security chief's transmission cut off abruptly. Through the smoke and confusion, Vex tracked the human delegation. They hadn't frozen or panicked. Instead, they were executing what appeared to be a pre-planned evacuation protocol. Ambassador Reynolds personally pulled an injured Phleboian delegate to safety, while another human, a junior assistant named Morgan Wright, who had always seemed particularly clumsy during diplomatic functions, disabled a pirate with a shockingly precise combat move. "Fascinating," Vex whispered, recording everything. The pirates were herding delegates toward the front of the chamber, where their leader, a scarred Volcronian with cybernetic enhancements, was demanding the activation codes for the station's defense systems. Meanwhile, the humans had successfully evacuated nearly 30 delegates of various species through their exit. Ambassador Reynolds was the last to leave, pausing to make eye contact with Vex himself. The human's expression was no longer that of the bumbling, friendly diplomat. His eyes were cold, calculating the eyes of a predator. He gave Vex a barely perceptible nod before disappearing through the door. Admiral Vex transmitted urgently. The humans knew this was coming. "What?" "That's impossible. How could they?" I don't know how, but they were prepared. They've evacuated their section and are moving through the maintenance corridors. I believe they're executing a counteroffensive. Exactly 12 minutes later, as the pirate leader was about to execute a Thraxian delegate as an example, the station's gravity suddenly reversed in specific sections of the chamber. Pirates floated helplessly, while security doors that had been sealed shut suddenly opened, admitting a perfectly coordinated security response. Leading them was Ambassador Reynolds, now holding a standard Confederation security rifle with the practiced ease of someone who had definitely used one before. You see, Vex whispered to a stunned Prill as they watched the humans efficiently direct the counterattack. They always sit at the back, because they're always planning for everything to go wrong. This emergency session of the Confederation Security Council will now commence, announced High Commander Trovax. His chitinous exoskeleton still bearing scorch marks from the attack. The chamber, a secure facility deep within the Harmonious Exchange Station, was filled to capacity with senior representatives from the Confederation's most powerful species. Vex couldn't believe his luck. After years of being dismissed as paranoid, he had been summoned to present his research on human behavioral patterns to the Council. His vindication should have felt sweeter, but the grim faces around the table suggested this was no time for personal triumph. "Lieutenant Commander Quazeel, you have the floor," Trovax said, gesturing with a partially regenerated limb. Vex stood, his nervous mandible clicks thankfully masked by the room's acoustic dampeners. "Esteemed council members, what I'm about to share may seem trivial at first, but in light of recent events." The holographic display activated, showing compilation footage of humans in various settings, all seated at the back of rooms, near exits, with clear sightlines to all entrances. "Is this some kind of joke?" growled General Krex of the Thraxian Empire. 17 delegates dead, and you're showing us seating arrangements. "With respect, General." Vex continued, his confidence growing. "These seating arrangements saved lives yesterday. The human delegation was the only group with an evacuation plan. They knew exactly which exits would remain functional despite the lockdown. They had mapped alternative routes through maintenance tunnels, and most importantly, they were positioned to execute their plan instantly." Admiral Gaz Kra, now sporting a regenerative patch over one eye socket, leaned forward. "Continue, Lieutenant Commander." "Thank you, Admiral. Following yesterday's attack, I took the liberty of accessing the station's security archives." Vex displayed a series of footage clips. 2 standard weeks ago, Ambassador Reynolds and his team requested a tour of the station's historical architecture. During this tour, they mapped every emergency exit, maintenance tunnel, and security checkpoint. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. "But that's standard procedure for many delegations," objected Diplomatic Minister Zella of the Phlebian conglomerate. "It proves nothing." "Perhaps not on its own," Vex agreed. "But observe this footage from their diplomatic reception 3 cycles ago." The display showed human diplomatic staff casually chatting with representatives from dozens of species. What initially appeared to be normal mingling revealed itself, under Vex's analysis, as a systematic information-gathering operation. "The humans call this working the room," Vex explained. "Note how they position themselves to engage with multiple conversation groups simultaneously, listening to discussions they're not directly part of. They're gathering intelligence while appearing to engage in social niceties." "Preposterous," huffed Dr. Besmal. "You're suggesting that humans, beings who can barely survive in environments outside their narrow habitable range, are master manipulators." "I'm suggesting they're survivors," Dr. Vex countered. "Their planet is a death trap by our standards. Extreme temperature variations, constant natural disasters, thousands of predatory species. Humans evolved not as the strongest creature on their planet, but as the most adaptable." The council chamber grew quiet as members processed this perspective. "Computer, display analysis Alpha 7," Vex commanded. The holograph switched to footage from the attack, this time enhanced to track the movement patterns of every species present. The visualization was striking. Most species either froze momentarily or moved chaotically. The humans moved with purpose from the first second. "Their positioning tactics aren't just defensive," Vex continued. "They're preparation for any scenario. Humans call it situational awareness. It's ingrained in their military, their security services, and apparently their diplomats." Commander Tozak, who had previously mocked human physical capabilities, raised a massive clawed hand. My sources inform me that Ambassador Reynolds was formerly something called a Navy SEAL before entering diplomatic service. Apparently, it's an elite combat unit specializing in covert operations. This revelation sent another ripple of concern through the chamber. Are you suggesting human diplomatic staff are actually military operatives? Demanded Chancellor Kovacs, who had survived the explosion but looked significantly worse for wear. No, Chancellor Vex clarified. I'm suggesting something far more interesting, that to humans, there may be little distinction between diplomacy and tactical operations. They approach both with the same methodology: assess threats, secure positioning advantage, plan for multiple contingencies. Across the chamber, representatives were already accessing their personal data terminals, reviewing footage of their own interactions with humans. By the cosmic void, gasped Minister Zella, staring at her screen. The humans in my embassy always position themselves with backs to walls during staff meetings. I thought they were being respectful by not turning their backs to anyone. In the medical exchange program, added Dr. Besmal reluctantly, human doctors insisted on reorganizing our emergency response protocols. They created triage positions near all exits. The waste management facility, grumbled General Krex. Humans suggested redesigning the central control room so all stations faced the entrance. We thought they were being efficient. Vex could barely contain his excitement as the council members shared their revelations. Across the Confederation, species were beginning to see humans in a new light. I recommend immediate formation of a specialized study group, Admiral Gaz-Krah declared. Every interaction with humans must be reviewed for tactical implications. Vex's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. Finally, someone was taking him seriously. Lieutenant Commander Quazeel will lead this initiative, the Admiral continued. His unique perspective has proven valuable. As the council session adjourned, Vex found himself surrounded by officials who had previously dismissed his research. They were now urgently requesting access to his data. Vex Prill approached, her gelatinous form unusually rigid with concern. Do you realize what you've started? If you're right about the humans. If I'm right about the humans, Vex replied, watching the anxious officials around them, then we've been underestimating the most dangerous species in the galaxy. For the last time, Vex, this is completely unnecessary. Ambassador Reynolds insisted as they walked through the human embassy's atrium. The space was carefully designed to appear welcoming and non-threatening, lots of plants, soft lighting, and comfortable seating arranged in casual groupings. Vex's 4 eyes darted everywhere, cataloging details. With all due respect, Ambassador, the Security Council has authorized this assessment. After the attack, which we helped stop, Reynolds interjected with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Precisely why we need to understand your methods, Vex continued, undeterred. The Council believes your species possesses tactical knowledge that could benefit the entire Confederation. Reynolds sighed, a human respiratory expression that Vex had learned indicated resignation. Fine. But my people aren't going to like being treated as lab specimens. They entered a large conference room where several humans and a handful of alien researchers waited. Vex recognized Dr. Besmal and Commander Tozak among the aliens. The humans included Morgan Wright, the clumsy assistant who had efficiently disabled a pirate, and several other embassy staff. Let's get this over with, Reynolds said, gesturing to a seat at the center of the table. Vex noted with interest, not his usual position at the back. Thank you for your cooperation, Vex began, activating his recording devices. We're here to understand human positioning tactics and situational awareness. Our preliminary research suggests these are innate behaviors in your species. The humans exchanged glances, a non-verbal communication method that Vex had been struggling to decode. You're overthinking this, said Morgan, leaning back in her chair with practiced casualness that Vex now recognized as deliberate. We're not executing some grand master plan. It's just common sense. Common for humans, perhaps Dr. Besmal interjected. But your common sense saved numerous lives during the attack. We'd like to understand the thought processes behind it. Reynolds tapped his fingers on the table, another human gesture Vex had cataloged as indicating either impatience or calculation. Look, human history is violent. Not just against other species we spent millennia fighting ourselves. Those of us who survived developed instincts. But your species has been at peace for generations, Commander Tozak rumbled. Your world wars ended centuries ago. At this, the humans actually laughed, a synchronized behavioral response that sent Vex's sensors into overdrive. Peace is relative, Commander Reynolds explained. We stopped dropping nuclear weapons on each other, sure, but conflict never ended. It just evolved. Evolution implies genetic adaptation, Dr. Quazeel noted. Are you suggesting these behaviors are encoded in your DNA? Some might be, replied Dr. Lena Rodriguez, the embassy's xenobiologist, but most are cultural transmissions. Human children are taught situational awareness from an early age, where to sit in public, how to identify exits, how to assess potential threats. Vex's mandibles clicked excitedly. So it is deliberate. You are strategically positioning yourselves. Not in the way you think, Morgan countered. It's not a conspiracy. It's survival instinct refined by experience. Perhaps a demonstration would help, Reynolds suggested, standing up. Computer, secure room for physical demonstration. The windows darkened and security fields hummed to life. Commander Tozak, Reynolds said, you once mentioned defeating a human in a physical contest. Would you mind attempting to restrain me? Non-lethally, of course. The massive Deltavian rose to his full 3-meter height, armor plates shifting as he moved toward the much smaller human. With pleasure, Ambassador. Though I'll try not to damage you too severely. What happened next occurred so quickly that Vex had to review his recording at reduced speed to fully comprehend it. As Tozak lunged, Reynolds simply wasn't there. The human had shifted position with minimal movement, causing the Deltavian to overextend. Reynolds then used Tozak's own momentum to send him crashing into the conference table. How Commander Tozak sputtered, struggling to right himself. Judo, Reynolds explained casually. Ancient human martial art. The principle is simple: use your opponent's strength against them. But you're physically weaker, Dr. Quazeel protested. Exactly, Rodriguez interjected. Humans developed dozens of combat systems specifically designed for physically weaker individuals to defeat stronger opponents. Position, leverage, timing, these matter more than raw strength. Vex was frantically recording every word. And this applies to your seating arrangements? Your evacuation protocols? Of course, Reynolds nodded. We position ourselves to maximize advantage and minimize vulnerability. Back to wall, clear view of entrances, proximity to exits. It's not complex strategy, it's survival. But why train diplomats in these techniques? Vex pressed. The Confederation has been at peace for centuries. The humans exchanged those meaningful glances again. Ambassador Reynolds, Morgan said quietly, I think it's time for full transparency. Reynolds nodded slowly. Lieutenant Commander, when humans say we prepare for the worst while hoping for the best, we mean it literally. Every human diplomatic mission includes contingency planning for catastrophic scenarios, from natural disasters to terrorist attacks to full-scale war. A heavy silence fell over the room. Not because we expect these things to happen, Reynolds continued, but because our history has taught us that peace is fragile. The pirates who attacked the summit, we didn't know they were coming. But we were ready because we're always ready. This is why you're revealing this now, Vex realized suddenly. Because you want the other species to adopt similar preparation protocols. The attack killed 17 delegates, Reynolds said grimly. It could have been hundreds. If more species had established evacuation routes, practiced emergency responses. For the first time, Vex saw beyond his obsession with human tactical positioning to the larger implication: humans weren't preparing for war. They were preparing for survival, not just their own, but everyone's. Your instincts aren't aggressive, Vex said slowly. They're protective. Finally, Morgan sighed. He gets it. The Alien Council's realization about human military genius. The Confederation Security Council's emergency chamber had never been so packed. Representatives from all member species crowded the tiered seating, murmuring anxiously as Admiral Gaz Kra took the central platform. Behind her stood Lieutenant Commander Vex, trying not to visibly preen at his newfound importance. This classified session will now begin, the Admiral announced, her voice cutting through the chatter. We are here to discuss the strategic implications of recent revelations regarding human defensive protocols. The massive view screen activated, displaying the now infamous footage from the summit attack, alongside analysis of human positioning tactics. As you can see, Vex began stepping forward. What initially appeared to be social preference was actually sophisticated defensive positioning. The humans were not simply attending a diplomatic function, they were securing tactical advantage in case of emergency. Chancellor Kovacs, still wearing regenerative bandages, leaned forward. Are we to believe all humans operate this way, or just their military and diplomatic personnel? That's the most fascinating aspect, Chancellor Vex replied. Our research indicates this behavior is culturally universal among humans. Their educational institutions teach children to identify emergency exits. Their entertainment venues announce evacuation routes before performances. Their entire society is structured around preparation for crisis. That's absurd, scoffed General Krex. No species maintains war readiness during peacetime. The psychological toll would be unbearable. Dr. Bezmal, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. Actually, General, the psychological toll of not being prepared would be worse for humans. Their evolutionary psychology requires a sense of control over potential threats. They find comfort in preparation. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. What the good doctor is trying to say, Admiral Gaz-Kra translated bluntly, is that humans are fundamentally different from us in how they perceive security. We build impenetrable defenses and consider ourselves safe. Humans assume all defenses can be penetrated and plan accordingly. Which is why Vex added, they always position themselves with clear sight lines, backs protected, and escape routes identified. It's not paranoia, it's pragmatism. The view screen shifted to display human military history, centuries of conflicts across Earth's varied terrain: desert warfare, mountain fighting, urban combat, naval battles, aerial dogfights, space skirmishes. In purely physical terms, humans are unimpressive, Commander Tozak admitted reluctantly. But they've developed warfare for every conceivable environment. Most species specialize. The Thraxians excel at frontal assault, the Melnarians at aerial combat. Humans practice everything. Not just practice, Admiral Gaz-Kra corrected. They master multiple approaches simultaneously. Look at this. The screen showed human military training exercises, soldiers transitioning seamlessly from underwater operations to land fighting to urban infiltration. Their military doctrine is based on flexibility, not overwhelming force, Vex explained. They call it asymmetric warfare, the strategic use of position, timing, and unexpected tactics to overcome superior enemies. Are we classifying humans as enemies now, asked Minister Zella, visibly concerned. Quite the opposite, Admiral Gaz-Kra replied. We're recognizing them as potentially our most valuable allies. Their perspective on defense is unique among Confederation species. Chancellor Kovacs's multiple eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep thought. You're suggesting we adopt human defensive protocols? I'm suggesting we've been blind to a fundamental truth, the Admiral stated firmly. For generations, the Confederation has defined military strength by traditional metrics: weapon yield, fleet size, planetary defenses. Humans define it by adaptability and preparation. The summit attack demonstrated this clearly, Vex added. While our security forces were neutralized by system overrides, the humans had analog backup plans. While we relied on automated containment protocols, they had manually mapped alternative routes. While we focused on preventing attacks, they assumed attacks would happen and planned their response. In essence, Dr. Bezmal summarized, human military genius lies not in their ability to win conflicts, but in their constant preparation for conflicts they hope to avoid. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Their positioning at the back of rooms, General Krex mumbled, finally understanding. Is not cowardice or social awkwardness, Vex finished triumphantly. It's strategic brilliance disguised as casual preference. They're not retreating from the action, they're positioning to observe, assess, and respond to threats from the optimal vantage point. Chancellor Kovacs rose slowly, his ancient frame creaking. Admiral, I believe we must reconsider our security doctrines in light of this information. Perhaps it's time we invited human strategic advisors to evaluate our defensive protocols. Chancellor Admiral Gaz-Kra replied with a rare smile. They've been offering for years. We just weren't listening. 3 standard months after the summit attack, the Confederation gathered for its centennial celebration aboard the newly reinforced Harmonious Exchange Station. The Grand Chamber had been redesigned with human security consultants' input, multiple exits, no blind spots, and comprehensive evacuation protocols for all species. Vex, recently promoted to commander, surveyed the room with satisfaction. Nearly every delegation had adopted elements of human positioning strategy. the Thraxians maintained clear sightlines to all entrances. The Melnarians had established rapid response teams. Even the typically oblivious Phlebians had rehearsed evacuation procedures. Quite a change from the last gathering, observed Prill, who had finally acknowledged Vex's research as not entirely delusional. Indeed, Vex agreed, his mandibles clicking contentedly. Notice how even species that traditionally cluster in the center have distributed their presence strategically throughout the room. Ambassador Reynolds approached, flanked by Morgan, right now officially recognized as his security chief rather than maintaining the pretense of being a diplomatic assistant. Commander Vex Reynolds greeted warmly. Your promotion was well deserved. As was the recognition of your security team's actual credentials, Vex replied. Reynolds laughed, a sound Vex had come to appreciate rather than find disturbing. Transparency has its benefits. Though I must say, some of your species have embraced our tactics with alarming enthusiasm. The Joraxian ambassador asked me if he should be carrying concealed weapons to breakfast. The pendulum will swing back to a reasonable middle, Morgan assured them. For now, heightened awareness is appropriate. Supreme Chancellor Krovax ascended the central platform, now surrounded by a transparent but highly reinforced security field, another human suggestion. Distinguished representatives of the Galactic Confederation, the Chancellor began. We gather today to celebrate a century of cooperation and to honor those who defended our alliance during the recent attack. The Decorations Committee has prepared a special tribute. The chamber lights dimmed gradually for the holographic presentation. Vex noticed the human delegation tensing subtly, an almost imperceptible shift in posture that he had learned to recognize as their transition to alert status. Ambassador, he whispered. Something's wrong. Reynolds nodded minutely. The lighting program specified a 3-second fade. That was 7 seconds. Before Vex could process this information, Reynolds was speaking quietly but urgently into his communication device. Throughout the chamber, humans who had been scattered among various delegations were suddenly in motion, not running or causing alarm, but moving with purpose toward specific positions. What's happening? Demanded Prill. Possibly nothing, Morgan replied calmly. Possibly everything. The holographic tribute began a beautiful display of shifting colors representing the member worlds of the Confederation. Spectacular, but something about the pattern struck Vex as unusual. The projection system's cycling power at irregular intervals, Reynolds murmured, could be a technical glitch. Or a mask for a security breach, Vex finished, his training kicking in. We should alert. The station's alarm system suddenly blared, not the expected soft tones of a technical malfunction, but the harsh wail of a critical emergency. Atmospheric containment breach in sectors 7 through 12, announced the station AI. All personnel evacuate immediately. Panic erupted. Delegates rushed toward the main exits, creating dangerous bottlenecks. Security personnel struggled to maintain order. This is no accident, Reynolds shouted over the chaos. The breach locations form a pattern designed to herd everyone toward the main evacuation shuttles. X's tactical training kicked in. A trap. Almost certainly, Morgan confirmed, already coordinating with other humans through her communication device. Commander, we need to redirect evacuees to the maintenance access routes. Without hesitation, Vex patched into the security network. All security personnel, implement Protocol Terran 7 immediately. The protocol, developed after studying human evacuation tactics, had seemed excessive during planning sessions. Now, as security teams efficiently redirected panicked delegates away from the main routes toward smaller, less obvious escape paths, its genius was evident. Ambassador Reynolds, Chancellor Krovax called out, being hustled toward a service corridor by his security detail. Your people predicted this. Not specifically, Reynolds replied, helping a struggling Phlebian delegate. We just never assume there's only one way something can go wrong. Later, after all delegates were safely evacuated, and the subsequent investigation revealed a sophisticated follow-up attack by the same pirate faction, one that would have captured or killed hundreds had they followed standard evacuation procedures, Vex found Reynolds at an observation window, staring at the damaged station. You saved everyone, Vex stated simply. Reynolds shook his head. We all did. Your species implemented the protocols perfectly. Because we finally understood the logic behind them, Vex replied. It's not just about positioning, is it? It's about perspective. Humans always assume things can go wrong not because you're pessimists, but because you're planners. There's an old human saying Reynolds offered with a slight smile. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. And always sit at the back of the room, Vex added, his mandibles clicking in what humans had come to recognize as laughter. Especially that Reynolds agreed, clasping Vex's upper appendage in a human gesture of friendship. Because someone has to watch the door.